way it is, and we really have to know what's going on in the contracts because it's become very litigious out there. And with representation, as we were talking about, buyers and sellers are getting smarter, and unfortunately, realtors are getting dumber. I mean, when they call on the phone, it's just amazing to me that they don't know anything. You know, they don't even remember who they are. They just start calling and talking. And I had that the other day. And she's just da, 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 and I'm treating her like a buyer, thinking, "Oh, good, we got a referral." And then all of a sudden, I'd like to show my client this house. I have to say, I reamed her out. I said, "Really? So you're a realtor? Who's your broker?" What she said, the company, and the broker has been in all kinds of stuff at the real estate association. I mean, really knows their stuff. And this gal was just like not saying a darn word. And I called up her broker, and her broker reamed her out a new one. Because you can't. You've got to identify yourself. So please remember, identify yourself. I don't want everyone to get that phone call from another broker.
We're all busy. I mean, social talk is fun, but not everyone has the time.
Answer the phone. Hi, I'm John McGee with Jessica. You know, anyway, it's just so frustrating. But so I mean, so the fastest way for a deal to fall apart is how?
Being stupid.
Being stupid, yeah, by not knowing your dates. I mean, and that's super, super, super important. I thought getting a refresher of this or just getting it in your head together is always really good. And it was good for me as I went through it too, because you just know stuff and you know it's in the contract, but where is it in the contract in case somebody asks? Like, I don't know. So this is going to be your little cheat sheet. We will create a little checklist for you with the major dates in there that you need so that you can make, you can take that and then make your own little form to send to your buyers and your sellers. And when you get all these dates and you put it together like that after you get a deal signed, I think that makes sense. So send it out to the buyers, send it out to the other agent involved, send it to the lender, send it to the insurance company. Anybody that's going to be involved in it needs to know those dates that we have to meet, because lenders don't normally think about it. They don't really care. They've got their little thing. Title companies do their little thing. So we like everybody to get on the same page. You can use the calendar in app files. There's a celebration calendar which has your closing date in it. But if you want to put in there when the escrows are due and when the financing is due and all of that kind of stuff, it shows up there and it just kind of helps remind you of what's there too. So that's how I use it rather than using my Google Calendar, because then I can just look at my file and it tells me, oh yeah, I better find somebody. I've got it. The lender needs to let me know what's going on and things like that. You guys, have you used it yet? Yeah, and it works really, really, really nice. So everybody's got the contact, right? Okay. So the first thing to know is the dates, right? All right. So what date do you think you have to know first? Or better yet, how do you count the dates?
Day of acceptance.
But how do we do it? Do we do calendar days? Do we do it business days? Yes. And that's on page 8. Because that's standard F, and that's how they count the days. So it's calendar days, except, and there's always the except when the dates fall on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday. And what defines a legal holiday? Because now we now have 12 instead of 8. We do have them in app files in there, but I also printed them up so that you know what days those are, because then we have to move the date to the day following the holiday. So that's really the only time it goes forward. So if the date for inspection falls on a Saturday, we move it to Monday, and if Monday happens to be President's Day, then we move it to Tuesday. And not everyone understands that, and different states don't do calendar days. Some of them do business days. Lenders don't like to do anything. They just like to do it their own way. So know those dates really well, because it's super important. We now have Juneteenth. How they say it? Juneteenth. That's a new day. It's a federal holiday, so it counts. But that's how we do it. Florida has different days as well, but this contract is using the federal holidays. Yes, so your effective date, and that's really super important. You're absolutely right. The effective date is the date the contract's signed, and then everything counts from that day forward. So we sign it today on the 8th. Yes. So we count our dates starting on the 9th. And that's another big thing too, because then the buyers don't know, sellers don't know. So remember, it's always starting the next day.
So I made a mistake saying effective date.
No, that's right. The effective date is today,
Uh-huh.
but every date it'll always say after effective date, and that's how you know that it's got to be counting from the next day. And they modified that contract. They used to not have after effective date, and then everybody was really confused whether I'm counting today as day one or am I counting tomorrow as day one. So you're right. So that's the time for acceptance. And when you asked about that time for acceptance, that's on the first page because that's the first thing we have to know, right? When we're presenting an offer, the time for acceptance and counteroffer. So your time for acceptance is the date, and you can put a time in there if you want. Otherwise, buried in all this stuff, it's 11:59 p.m. that they have until. So if you want an answer like by tonight at 5 p.m., put that in there.
A lot of people are very lax on, okay, you've got till tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And then the realtor will call up and go, well, they're still at work. No big deal, we'll just go to the next. But it really isn't in the contract. The contract is null and void at that point.
Well, it's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other parties don't have to accept the reply.
Right.
They can. So it doesn't die. And I think that's what most of us make the mistake. It's not dead, but it's what they want to do with it afterwards. So if you run into that stuff, holler. If you're really,
there are a bunch of them that are very lax on this for various reasons.
Yeah. And I mean, the right thing to do would be, then let's do an extension of an acceptance date. That way you're covered better. But a lot of times we just, it's no problem,
But if someone doesn't respond by the acceptance date, is the contract void?
It just sits there. So they can still respond.
Of course.
Like if the seller finally comes back and says, "Oh, I love it, I'll take it," the buyer can say, "Well, I don't have to do it anymore."
Right. But you change.
But he could if he wanted to.
Right.
So he could still accept the seller's signature on it.
You just change the date to the new date.
Leave it alone.
Leave it alone.
You leave it alone after they sign it, because the effective date goes by their signature. It'll be the date that's on there. Yeah, you shouldn't change it unless you're adding an addendum. And then you would do an addendum saying we will wait 48 hours, or put dates in instead of doing like the 48 hours, because it's better that way.
Okay, that's a good thing to know.
Yeah.
Because I've always done that, so just doing something unnecessary.
Well, yeah. I mean, don't confuse it. Just because
like there's 15 people lined up right now, but back in the day, it's like you didn't sign and the next guy
went in. Yeah. But we want to try to keep the players in. So if you can do an addendum, that's always a little bit better. It's like when we do home inspections and they're not done, get that extension, or you're leading yourself down a whole big path.
I was just a stickler on always changing that.
That's okay. It's okay. But I wouldn't. Counteroffers. Remember counteroffers? Counteroffers should be in writing, as we all love to see them in writing. But there is wording in the contract that talks about the time frame for counteroffers. Does anybody know what it is? Billy's got it right. It's 2 days after the day the counteroffer is delivered. So you deliver the counteroffer in writing today, then we count 9 and 10. That does not mean this is prioritized and nobody else can bring in an offer. During that time frame, those 2 days, another offer can come in. But during that time period, any buyer or seller can walk away too. Can just say, "Whoops, changed my mind. I withdraw my counter. I don't want to accept it." Yeah.
So the seller isn't on the hook during that.
They are not on the hook. Neither party is on the hook during that time. And that's one reason you always want to encourage your sellers to counter back quickly and say, "Let's counteroffer," but the counteroffer is only going to be good for X, because if we write something that's not in the contract, that takes priority.
That's what I would always do.
So yeah, do like a 24-hour acceptance on a counteroffer. And then every time they counteroffer, it starts again.
When I started, it was only like 2 pages.
Oh yeah, it was like 4 pages, and it had carbon, remember? And Floyd Wickman always say, "Press hard, 3 copies."
Okay, question. So if the seller
Yes.
doesn't accept it in that 2-day period, they can't accept it on day 3?
They can, but then the buyer's under no legal obligation to move forward. And that's why we would try and encourage everybody to walk within there. Yeah. But that's a really good question, because some people will just lollygag. Well, let's see if I get another offer. That's usually what the sellers do, is let me see if I can get another offer, and I don't have to respond for 2 days, right?
Well, and especially if it's their first offer and it just got listed, and that's normally when
they get greedy, and sometimes it falls right against their face, right? Then those are the things you really have to know first, and then deposits. And remember, a contract does not have to have deposit to be a binding contract. Back in way back, we used to have to get checks, and we'd show the seller the checks and say, "Look, we have a deposit," and they wouldn't look at the offer unless there was money, good faith money with it, or a pink slip for your car, or your Rolex watch. I mean, anything can be a deposit if you write it in. But our normal way that we do things now, and that's on 2A, the initial deposit. Most people don't accompany the offer, right, which is on line 30, but they make it within 3 days, and it's left blank. So the contract just defaults to 3 days after effective date. So that's how you count. If you don't select anything, then obviously it defaults to the 3 days. So if you forget, or they don't put it in, if you're on the listing side. Calendar days. Everything on here is going to always be calendar days.
Back in the day, if it was less than 10 days.
Then it was like, yes, they've changed stuff. Yes.
So we don't do the less than 10 day thing.
For
business days. If it's more than 5 days, then it's.
Oh yeah, no, we don't do that anymore. They changed all that.
I'm glad I
We made it in. And that's why you got to read that paragraph.
Yeah, okay.
What paragraph did I say? Page 8, standard F, like Frank, or other words in there.
Okay.
Yeah, so they made it really they made it much simpler now, which is great, because if it was 5 days then this, and then 10 days then this, and that just made loopholes and it made problems. And I think Florida Realtors have done really good in keeping this as straightforward and easy as possible, so that both people can understand it. This is like a side thing off of the dates, but if they don't put the escrow agent name in there, it's still legal. It's still a binding contract, because we've had that question before. You can put TBD or whatever if the listing agent doesn't do it, but make sure that they understand that. And Jones & Co. Realty does not hold escrow. It's got to go to the title company. There are some companies that do still hold escrow in their. I think Royal Shell is doing it. I think we just saw one the other day. I think Royal Shell is holding escrow deposit. Yeah, and we're like, oh, yes, dumb. Don't do it. We won't do it.
Now I have a question.
Yes.
After the contract is all done and everything's firm, and no one's filled out where the escrow is going to go.
Yeah.
I always have it filled out, and I have the buyer and seller initial it, because it's after the fact.
That's a good idea.
Is it necessary?
No, I mean, you don't even need to change the contract. All they have to do is send you a note. It could be an email, whatever, just escrow to be made at so-and-so. But that's the whole thing. As soon as you get the contract, it's like, hey, that's great. What title, what escrow company are we using? Show the trail that you're trying to get your buyer to comply within the 3 days, because that's really important. The closing date is also so important, right? And that's paragraph 4, and that goes from page 1 to page 2, which I don't like. I liked when everything was on the first page. It made it so much easier. So when you're looking at the calendar, don't put a closing date of Saturday. Or a Sunday. I want a Thursday. You know why? It can't go forward. Why can't it go forward? It's a contract. So the contract has to end on that date.
Right. Okay.
So if you put a Saturday or a Sunday, they will roll back to the last business day.
I remember
Yeah. Because everybody, it's Saturday. Well, we'll just close on Monday. Nope. Because now everybody's out. Now you're in violation of the contract. So make sure when you check it, you get a good date, not a holiday. And honestly, for it to be legal, it can't say 45 days after acceptance date. The law wants a date. Just like when you do a listing contract, it can't it way back in the day they used to say 180 days. Now you have to have a beginning date and an ending date. Same thing on the contract. The law looks at a date.
See, a lot of times people will say such and such date or before.
Yes, you can put or before. It doesn't hold up legally. Nobody has to honor it legally. If somebody dug their heels in, they could say it says April 28th or before. I'm not closing until April 28th, and there's no teeth to it. You can't do it. It's a nice psychological thing. What I would do if you have that and you finally decide on a date, I would do an addendum changing the closing date. Everybody agrees to close on such and such a date and have them sign it. Then that way you've created that date and everybody knows what they have to do. And that's what will hold up in a court of law, is whatever the date is in ink. Or
especially for a lender that has to get everything out in the 3 days prior to. And
oh, that's fun stuff. Yeah, which is a nice segue into financing. Which, because I'm skipping around, I know these dates are in different parts, but I'm taking more in what's more important than anything else. And financing, which is on page 2, sorry, page 2, section 8. That's your next big important dates. And Lynn was right. You know, lenders have their own little way of doing things, and the contract has defaults on here. So if you don't fill things in, it's defaulting to days. Okay, so if it's a cash, we don't worry about it. But if the contract's contingent upon, and you've got blank, right, within blank days after effective date. So if you don't put anything in, it defaults to 30 days after effective date. So when you're putting your closing date in on a financing deal, make sure those dates line up, or you've got some time to close. You know, do you really want to have your buyer getting financing all the way up to the 30th day, and that's the day that he's supposed to close? That's not very good for the seller.
As a listing agent, if you get a contract and it has a 30-day close and they leave that blank,
Then it defaults to 30 days. I would probably correct that. I would probably use that in a counteroffer. I would call the lender and say, how long is it really going to take us to get this buyer approved? And if it's a full 30 days, I would probably change the closing date and extend it out. Because the last thing you want to do is have the seller pack up all their furniture, show up to the title company, and then the lender at the last minute says, oops. You know, that's a really bad situation.
yeah, when it's on the moving truck.
And then you get sued. And we don't like getting sued. So no, so be real careful about making sure those dates line up. And it also makes them, if you go all the way down to line 97, which is B at 1, I'm doing this off my glasses. Buyers shall make application for financing within blank, and it defaults to 5 days after effective date. Everything starts from that after effective date. So you want to make sure as a listing agent that the buyer has made application with that lender. If you have the buyer, you want to make sure they're schlepping in there and making their application within 5 days. Because if they don't, they're technically in default of the contract. And now there could be problems. The seller could be looking for a deposit that hopefully the buyer remembered to make in the 3 days. I mean, you're following up on these people like crazy on that. So that's super important on it. Oh, no, where are my glasses? This helps a lot. Thank you. Okay. I hope you guys on the camera are getting fun. All right. So we've got that, right? Page 3. Okay. Page 3 continues financing. And that's where all these little trickies are, right? So they've made application. They have to get loan approval 30 days. They have to make application within 5 days. And then they've got to get their loan. And that's the other stuff that comes in here. On page 120, line 120, if the buyer fails to timely deliver any written notice, right? If they get approved, they've got to send the written notice. They don't have to show the letter, but they have to give written notice that they have been approved or not approved. That's where the seller is going to look for that letter of denial and all of that kind of stuff. If they do it, then then it's nice and easy and smooth, and who gets what money back, and they move forward. But if they don't do it, if the buyer does not tell anybody that they got loan approval or that they didn't, this cracks open the contract. So if you look at line 123, right? If they don't do it, if they don't send any notice, the seller may elect to terminate the contract. He might have a really nice backup offer he wants to take, and the buyer forgot to send the loan approval, right? So now the seller has lovely 3 days after the end of that loan approval period, but he has to do it in those 3 days, and 3 calendar girl days, saying, we're done. And assuming that the buyer has done everything else he's supposed to do, deposits and all of that, the seller can cancel the contract and just give the money back, give the deposit back to the buyer. The buyer can't argue with it, basically. And then the seller can move forward and take another contract. That's something you have to really, really be careful of. Yes?
On this line 122, 123,
Mm-hmm.
it talks about reverting to paragraph 8A.
Mm-hmm.
Would that mean that instead of financing, it becomes a cash deal?
Yep.
So is the buyer obligated, if he doesn't have the cash, to move forward as a cash deal?
If he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he's telling the seller, I don't need financing. I'm going to pay cash. And now he's put his deposit at risk. But the seller still can override him, basically, and say, I don't want to sell to you. Cancel. Yeah. Because some buyers will feel very comfortable that they know they're going to get loan approval and they want to move forward. So they'll tell the seller, they'll write a letter saying, I don't have loan approval, but I'm moving forward. At that point, then their deposit becomes at risk.
They still are using financing.
And they can, yeah. I mean, even if a buyer just says they're getting it's a cash transaction, they can go get a loan. We don't care. But they're
Not secured by the deposit.
but it's not, yeah.
The one thing I find with a lot of this is if you are the listing agent, you don't usually have any contact with the buyer. And if the agents aren't real swift, you don't have contact, they don't communicate. So I tend to talk to the lender all the time.
You
I
should.
won't even present an offer to my seller without calling the lender first and make sure they've been pre-approved.
Absolutely, because you want to know.
They lie.
Oh, yeah.
Or it could be they give you an old pre-qualification letter, like 45 days old.
Yeah.
You want to know it sooner, yeah. And the contract does have the wording in there that gives us the authority to talk to the buyer's lender, because we've had buyers, that's none of your business. Well, yes, it is, and we've got permission right there. And sometimes we have to tell lenders that, because sometimes lenders don't read these contracts, and they don't know. Oh, I can't talk to you. You're not on that side. Shall I refer you to this contract?
Yeah, you don't have to give me all their personal
Right.
stuff, but are they approved? Do I have a good buyer? Because I need to present this offer to my listing, and
Right.
I don't want them to take a house off the market that, the buyer really sucks, and you don't want to tell them.
And are they going to need some kind of help from the seller? That's super important.
Yeah, especially on an FHA. Because a lot of those come in after you've negotiated the contract, then you get an addendum asking for 10% or whatever.
Yes.
Question for cash buyers, probably.
Sure.
Do they have to show proof of funds within a certain period of time?
The contract itself, pre-printed, doesn't have that in there. But usually what we do is we ask for that, and we'll put it in the confidential comments. We'll discuss that with the seller, because the seller drives the bus, and then we'll say, please present contracts on which contract you're going to use, whether it's a standard or an as-is or a Naples form, with proof of funds or loan approval. Because even if they're getting a loan approval, they're putting down 20% down, I'd like to know that they have the 20%, because sometimes their 20% is coming from stock sales or something like that, and you don't know where it's coming from. So that's your duty for the seller, but you can just put it right in the confidential comments, and that will hold up to the other person.
So we can ask for confirmation of the cash for
Mhm.
the deposit.
Yep. Absolutely.
What happens, I just received a contract, it's a cash deal,
Okay.
but then they put in the additional comments based on them getting an equity loan.
So then it's financing, and that's other. That's fine. Anything other.
So how is the contract going to be treated if they don't get an equity loan?
Did they put a date in it? That's the other thing. When we write stuff in contracts, we have to have dates in there for it to hold up. So if they put subject to getting a home equity loan, that would be the first thing I'd say to them. Can you tighten that up? How many days is it going to take them? And put that date in there. Then it's going to go all the way to the date of the contract, to the contract closing date. And you don't want that. That's why you always want to put dates in there. Because we'll see stuff like that when you do home inspections and they do repairs. Seller to fix the plumbing. By when? You know, that's whenever you read something, it's like, okay, what has to happen to make it work? And that's our job as the expert, is to tear that apart and make sure that we cover our butts and our customers' butts as well as it can be. So you're always asking for by a date, ask for confirmation, that kind of thing. Especially equity loan, yeah. Well, they may already have it. If they have it, they may be able to give you a letter that they have it. But they probably don't. And that's why they put in additional terms and conditions. And we have to always be smarter than the other agent on the other side, because I always assume that they don't know what they're doing. Not in a mean way, but it's my job. I'm the conductor. I have to make sure that everybody is playing and doing their part when they're supposed to do the part. And ultimately, that's our responsibility to our customer. Right? Okay, where was I? Question? Any more questions on that?
I have another simplistic question.
Good.
Because, I'm used to dealing from years ago. Sometimes that pops in my head with dates and stuff. So I'm going to digress, I guess, a little bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of times, like with home inspections, the home inspection falls on the weekend, the guy can't get there, so the agent sometimes, well, it just goes to the next business day.
Yeah.
It does not apply anymore, or does it?
You mean?
I'm thinking, is the 5-day rule, is that just for national holidays, or does that include weekends? To skip to the next business day?
Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday.
All right.
And that's in there.
I covered it, but I wanted to ask again.
No, and that's a really, we can skip over to that one, because the home inspection is on page 5. That one has a default on there. That's property inspection, the right to cancel based on the inspection. If left blank, it's 15 days after effective date. So that's why you want to look, again, when you get a contract, does it fall on a Saturday, Sunday, whatever, because then they're going to get extra days. And depending on whose side you're on, you may want them. We've had major problems with these kind of things where the home inspection comes up on a Saturday, the buyer waits until Monday, and then they exercise their right to cancel on Monday. And then the sellers are really bent out of shape.
Yeah.
But legally, they had until Monday to do that. And then if Monday's the holiday, then they've got another day till Tuesday. Yeah.
Okay, I'll write that down.
So yeah, so there you want, so when you're writing your contract as a buyer, look at the calendar and put those dates in there to where it's going to make sense. Where it's to your benefit and also the customers. Because the customer, we want to keep this as tight as possible. We only get paid when it closes. And we don't want to give anybody an excuse to get out of it. That's why we work, right? We don't do it for fun. But that whole big paragraph basically says within that time period, they can cancel for any reason whatsoever. We just say we have to that's why we want to tighten that up a lot. Don't give them that much chance. You can always try to extend it if something big shows up. And most sellers will be in agreement like that. Like there's a house we're doing, is it yours? With the cloth plumbing? Cloth wiring. Not you. There's a house built in the 80s. And it has cloth, it's in Tanglewood, Donna Guido. It has cloth wiring in the house.
That silver stuff that's all shiny.
Where it's wrapped in.
I've never seen that.
No, I know. Usually 60s, but it's in there in the house in the 80s. It's in perfect shape and it works wonderfully.
It's throughout the entire house.
That's the only way they can fix it. They'll have to take out entire paneling, everything. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It's built in the mid-80s.
Tanglewood was for all built in the 60s.
Well, this one was built in the 80s.
That's why I asked, the whole house was done that way.
I don't know, honestly. I don't know. I know it's usually, oh,
Yeah, most of it.
yeah. So, but in a case like that, they discovered that during the inspection period. So the buyer still wants to move forward, but doesn't want to accept it. So they've done an extension to the inspection period for the seller to go get some bids, and the buyer is going to decide after and then they'll decide whether they're going to do a credit or whatever. But that can mess your time frames up,
It's like some of these old houses in the 60s with the plumbing going to the street. If you check the pipes and everything, it's fine. But if you don't get somebody in to run a camera from the street up, a lot of that stuff's almost collapsed, so that you've got issues.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't think about that.
When you're dealing with older homes, that's why it becomes so important to have a home inspection. We actually started to get sued on one house. The seller, it was one of the older homes off of McGregor. We sold it to the couple, and then they resold it 2 years later. The buyer, at the end, started to do some remodeling, and it was discovered through an accident that the house had never been connected to city water and sewer. It had been on water, but not sewer. It had been on a septic system for 40 plus years. It had never been touched, so you can imagine what happened. And all the people involved had been paying sewer bills for 40 plus years. So there was no way that anybody knew that it wasn't connected.
Oh my God, where was this?
Right off McGregor, one of the older houses. But the home inspector, I guess, I don't know how you would know, how you would look. He assumed, and the buyer was an attorney and the seller was an attorney. I said, go for it. We did everything we could.
How did that happen?
It can happen. I had it happen in Fort Lauderdale. We had a rental house that we managed, and all of a sudden the tenant calls up, my house is full of poop. And the septic tank was in the back. It had been covered up by a patio years before the owner bought it, and they were paying the city of Fort Lauderdale sewer, so nobody would have reason to suspect that it's there.
Well, I mean, if no one followed up and did a permit or
So
anything.
for 40 years, they never had it out to you.
Right.
It's like, how often were they actually there?
I
You get a lot of people come down for a month or so.
That's probably how it survived 40 years. But
well, you get a bunch of them in North Fort Myers that are on city water and septic, and the septics are in the back. But a lot of them, what they've done is bypass the washing machine.
And they do the French,
so
and they do the French
water.
drains, which are illegal.
Yeah.
But
I have a neighbor that's
house-
doing it.
Tomato plants love that though.
But I had a house I bought, back at the beginning, and I didn't know it. And so when the washer ran, it'd be bubbling up in the backyard, but it was just soapy water. But
Yeah.
I've seen it with other houses where they bypassed it,
Yeah.
ran it into the flower beds so that the septic didn't fill up with washing.
Yep. A lot of that in older houses. That's why you really, really want to have a good home inspector, because they can catch that.
Yeah.
That they can catch when they do the inspections, and then you can find out whether it was permitted to have a French drain back in the late 50s in North Fort Myers, which it was, but not now. So
Well, I had one the house was built in the 90s, and they
Yeah.
added extra, and they bypassed it into the front flower bed.
I have a neighbor down the street who's doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's drought, right, everywhere, and there's this nice puddle in the empty field right next door to him. I found it when Harvey jumped in it, and I went in right behind him. I'm like, okay, what water is this?
Yeah.
That was like, oh, you didn't know. Okay, where were we? Oh, property inspections. Okay, and home inspections. We got all that stuff. Let's talk about other fun stuff that happens like within the first 5 days. Does anybody know there's a little survey standard in here?
Boy,
There is on page 4.
I'm embarrassed to say I've done this wrong.
This is why this is fun. We're not going to talk about title defects for surveys. We're just staying on dates. But there is a little thing. Where's page 4? Yes, 5, 6, and I apologize. I started tearing my contract apart. So now I've got it all out of order. So page 4, 9D. And depending on the side you're on, it becomes important as to what you're going to do. Somebody want to read it? Because I can't find my page.
Okay, at least 5 days prior to closing date, buyer may, at buyer's expense, have the real property surveyed and certified by a registered Florida surveyor.
Right.
If seller has a survey covering the real property, a copy shall be furnished to the buyer and closing agent within 5 days after effective date.
And most of our sellers aren't aware of that. So when you list the property as a listing agent, do you have a survey, Mr. Seller?
I always say.
And if they don't, well, then you don't have to fulfill that requirement. And you just tell them that because the buyers are going to get it when they get their loan. But if it's a cash deal, that starts to become important to customers.
Is there any time limitation to that survey? So what if you did it 30 days before you sold? Doesn't matter?
No, surveys don't.
I had a buyer that didn't want to survey out in North Fort Myers on a large piece of property. I said, oh my goodness, no, you have to get one.
You really should get a
Good
survey.
catch,
Yeah.
you know, please, good God.
If they get it done late, closer to closing, and there's a problem, that's when then you have to extend contracts, and that whole thing kicks in. It doesn't happen that often, but the sooner you get a survey done, the better. Especially if there's encroachments. A lot of HOAs, those wonderful little zero lot line places, they're putting in sprinkler systems like right on the property line, or maybe your sprinkler's on your neighbor's property line, and then you have an encroachment, or they'll do that with a fence right on there. So now you've got an encroachment. You could have a potential survey problem, and now everything else starts rolling down the hill. So.
If you're in an HOA and the HOA is responsible for watering the lawn,
Mm-hmm.
you put the sprinkler.
Then it's an HOA, but that's more common element. It's more if you have to do it, or if they let you put a dog. Like if a lot of times you'll see them, they'll let the owners put fences in for their dogs, and then they don't, and they'll just do it. They don't do it with the survey, and all of a sudden they find out they're really on their neighbor's property, and now who has to move the fence, who's going to do what, and then you've got all that legal mess, and that gets fun.
Do we have an addendum that addresses that?
A survey?
Yeah, the survey. I'll look.
There might be one,
Just in case
but
there's a problem.
there is a whole but there is a whole paragraph in there on if there's a problem with the survey. That's on page 8. I'm not going to go down the whole thing in there, but that's if there's encroachments, and it goes through things like that.
Well, the other thing is if they had a survey because they bought the house because it was new and there was no fence, but then the survey that they're going to give you isn't any good if they've added a fence. The title company won't,
Right,
they'll
then you've
look
got to
at
have
it.
it done.
If they changed anything from when the survey was done, usually adding a swimming pool, a fence, anything like that, you need a new survey.
Mm-hmm. That is true. So page 3. Now we're going to go to title, because now we're getting into title from the survey stuff if there's a mess, because they'll give you an exception, right? We'll accept the fence and this and that, and the buyer and seller can still sit at closing and come up with agreement to allow that, and the title will be all right. But on page 3, title, evidence, and insurance, it has those other little blanks on there, right? These are fees. So title, evidence, and insurance, at least blank, 15 days, or 5 days prior to 5 days prior to closing. That's the part you really want to remember, is 5 days prior to closing, a title insurance commitment is issued. So you always want to make sure that it's done. I usually try to get it done sooner than that in case there is a problem. Like try to get it 10 days prior to closing, or even 15, depending on where your financing is and things like that. Oh, that's okay. That's super important. And the seller has to furnish a copy to the buyer and the agent within 5 days after the effective date if they have a title insurance policy. That's on 160. That's the only time the seller really has to keep that title insurance policy, because it does become important, especially if there's a problem with the title with the new company. They can go back to that original title insurance policy and correct from there, or sometimes you even have to go back to that original insurer to continue if there's a little cloud or if there's a bubble. So those are the important things. When you list it, you always want to ask if they have a survey, do they have title insurance, get those copies, and you can always provide those then to the buyer as well. And that kind of helps you when you decide about what title company you're going to use to close too, because we want to try to save our seller the best, the most money, but still have a good title company. And we know if there's going to be a problem, then you use the original title company because they'll continue it. If they made a boo-boo, they will continue to insure so that they don't have to pay out, because we've had that happen. So if there is a problem, go to page 7. Page 7 on 18A. Or page 8 at the beginning, the top, the title exam. So after the title commitment comes out, after they get it, the buyer has 5 days to read it and make sure it's okay. Because there's always going to be exceptions to it. Like oil and mineral rights are usually not granted there. Sometimes buyers are thinking they're going to buy in Golden Gate because they're going to dig for oil and they may be able to do it on their property. And then the title is going to say, nope, we're not going to cover that. Things like that. They need to know what rights they can and cannot get with the property. So the title commitment really becomes important to read. And it also because it will mention any liens that are there that have to be paid off, or if they're being sold subject to liens, like our utility assessments. Those are subject to that the title company is not going to insure for. So it's in that title commitment. So I would, as their agent, I would read it as well, because the buyers are going to have lots of questions. And of course, we don't interpret. We say, go see an attorney. But at least we've got some idea if there's going to be a problem. If there is a problem that has to be fixed, like somebody died and they didn't get the right signature on something, the contract on page 3, on line 367, gives the seller 30 days automatically to cure the title defect. We don't have to go and extend the closing date of the contract with an addendum. It's already automatically provided 30 days. It's on page 8. It's in the contract. When they sign the contract, they automatically know that there could be an automatic extension of 30 days. No, don't, because it's already provided in the contract. Because anytime we write something different than the contract, that overrides the contract. So don't do that. You were not attorneys.
Right, so overriding the situation.
Yes, don't do it. If you feel like you're going to do that, you call JJ, and then JJ will talk you off the ledge.
Okay.
No.
Well, we used to write our own addendums.
I know, we do. And the less you can add to a contract, the better you are, because we are not attorneys. If it's something really weird, then the attorneys will get involved in it. Like if you do a 1031 exchange, there's always an addendum that company is going to provide, and that has been written up by attorneys, not us. We keep things as simple as possible.
Okay, so I make it hard on myself.
You're making it harder on yourself. So do that. 30 days. That way the buyer knows, because sometimes they ask. And your seller has to know that, but it's automatic. And it just goes through that whole thing about extended curing periods, and don't worry about all that stuff. But basically, you need to know if they've got 5 days to review the title, make sure everything's okay. If there is a problem, it's 30 days from the time they discover the problem. So the title company comes up with it 15 days prior to closing date, which is why we put it in the contract earlier to get it known faster, because that 30 days then is now only 15 days past the closing date.
So now you need an extension.
No, there's extended cure period in there. Don't worry about that. That's what I said. It gets like that messy, just call JJ. We call 5 days, 15 and 30. Those are really your days that almost everything kind of falls in when you're doing all of that stuff. But it's amazing what's in these 13 little pages that people are signing. You don't realize it, because we just go 6 through 10, right? Just push that onto the side, and then we go on to page 11 and say, here, just sign. So there's all kinds of little fun stuff in there. I know. Okay, so they get all that fixed, and it's really exciting, and we're getting closer to closing date, right? So page 12, is it page 12? Where's the final walkthrough? Is it page 12? I could be wrong.
With additional terms.
Wait, no, I was wrong. Excuse me.
Counter offer.
There we go. Walkthrough inspection. Okay. It's 12B. That's what the 12 is. It's followed right. It follows property inspection. It's on page 6. It's the walkthrough inspection and re-inspection. I apologize. It's on the very beginning. So it says walkthrough inspection / re-inspection. Because everybody wants to know when they can do the walkthrough. How many walkthroughs does a buyer get? 1. They all want to go, oh, can I go back in and look and measure for drapes and this and that? And I just want to go back and check. Legally, they don't have the right to go back in more than 1 time after the inspection. The buyer and the seller have to agree to let people come in and come out. And we don't like them to do that because they always seem to find stuff, more stuff. I mean, you're reminding your seller he has to maintain the house in the same fashion. That's in all those pages, 6 through 10. But the day before closing or on the closing date, that's when the buyer has the legal right to go in and walk through. When I say re-inspection, and it has the words in there, that it's not for them to do a whole brand new inspection. That's only to inspect what they might have asked for to be fixed before. They want to make sure that the house is in the same working order, that refrigerator wasn't switched out, that the washer dryer is still there, that the air conditioner didn't break 3 days ago and the seller said, well, I'm selling it as is, so I don't have to fix it. Wrong. We've created a form that's a final walkthrough inspection form. That's a really good idea to bring with you when you have a buyer, because we want them to sign off that they've accepted the property. Or you'll put something in there that says this is not acceptable, and then you're going to negotiate from there. If you're the listing agent, I always send it out to the selling agent and say, here, would you please have your buyer sign this? Because it's really the best CYA for every agent and every seller and every buyer in the whole thing. It sets it down that everybody either had a problem that has to be identified and fixed, or the house is now in good and working order. If we ever have a problem after closing, they will call a year or 2 after and go, something's wrong with this house. The first thing I look for in that file is the home inspection in there? Did you get a copy? Is the termite inspection, WDO, in there? Is there that final walkthrough inspection form in there? Or is there a waiver that says, I waive my right to have a home inspection? All those houses that we sold in the last few years where nobody was having home inspections and everything else, now we're starting to hear, oh, the seller failed to disclose this. Well, it's 3 years later, but who knows? So if you've got your paperwork, then that becomes a non-issue.
Yeah, I remember when they weren't allowing them to have home inspections. It's like, you're waiving everything if you want this house and get to pay $50,000 over.
Yeah. So all we want to do is CYA, so we don't have to pay that extra $50,000 down the road.
So there's a pre-made addendum for that waiver, and they decide they don't want it, because I would always have to write something up.
Yeah, there's
okay,
that's fine, and that's what you want. Even if they send you an email that says, you know what, I decided I'm not going to have a home inspection, or I don't need a WDO, because it's a new house. Okay.
Yeah, I remember a few of those.
Have a home inspection, $100.
The rafters sit out on the ground for a long, long time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say the name of the builder with an L that I would highly encourage anybody. You sell a new house to anybody, I would still encourage the buyer to have a home inspection. Have an inspection done.
Pages of stuff. We bought a brand new first home, and there were pages of things that.
Oh yeah.
I did one recently, and they never hooked the air conditioner, the drain, or anything in. But we brought in a full home inspector on that one.
And honestly, that's really what you should do.
I mean, back in the day, they were actually, a lot of the builders were pretty ethical. It wasn't an issue, but now, yeah.
Well, when they build fast, they skip stuff, and sometimes it's not on purpose.
No.
Other times it is. We've had closings where it wasn't structural so much, but like, there was supposed to be this wonderful brick on the brick fascia on the house, and it's not there.
Well,
and then they promised to do it. Oh, goody. Let's figure out a way to make that promise stick.
Well, I had it once where they had moved in and within a month, the sewage was backing up. But what had happened was they'd run over the stuff going into the leach field, and of course they didn't know right away.
Isn't it
But
fun?
they did come back and take care of it, so.
Yeah, that's the only thing, they will come back.
They will come back and fix it, but if we can avoid problems,
You
and
know,
that's
there's some things you're not gonna catch no matter what, but at least if you go back in with a home inspection, and on new construction anymore, I wouldn't do it any other way.
and that's it. Our job is to tell them that, tell them all the things that could happen, and if they choose not to follow our advice, that's up to them.
Well, because they figure they get that builder warranty.
For a year, well, if nothing else, okay, let's buy the buyer 210 warranty up beyond that, get an extra thing, because that will definitely
Oh, I've
save.
done that.
And they're wonderful to have. They really, really are.
Good question. How
Yes.
do you enforce the inspection?
How do you
You
mean?
know, if it is, you find things that are wrong
On
on
in-
it, you just force the builder to fix it within a time period? or
Yeah, it's
anything?
pretty much like the same thing. Yeah, because they've got their deadlines in their 40-page contract about what you do. And Billy's had quite a bit of experience with it.
List and you walk through with the construction superintendent,
Yeah,
we just add to the punch list.
So you do an
you
addendum.
go in with blue tape
Yeah,
everywhere.
but you would do an addendum like 10 days before closing, the buyer will have a home inspection.
If you're dealing with a bigger builder, they already have the punch list and things like that, and everybody signs off on those. If you're dealing with a little onesie twosie builder, then you would do something like that.
I've never done it. I should have done it on a couple. I won't tell you the story.
And it's okay. There's different things with the new construction. Even if you just use a FAR contract and you're doing new construction, the Florida law says that the builder has to disclose the insulation factors, and we do have an addendum for that. So if you're selling new construction, I would automatically include that in there and have the seller complete that. Just little tiny things, and those you just learn as you're in the business.
Right.
I worked for a builder when I first got started, so that was really good. I worked for Roger Campanolo, and he was building. So I learned all the goods and the bad of building homes, and it was really good. It was really good experience for me. Yeah. If the board does, and the board will do like tours of where they'll take you out to look at houses and the construction of how houses are done in Florida. If you can get to one of those, it's absolutely the best thing in the world to know how they build houses in Florida, because it's so different than up north. You look at all those little hurricane strap things, and you're like, what in the world are they doing? They got little pieces of wood, and they're just monkey rigging my house together, because you don't know if you're from up north. It makes no sense.
And the Romex running loose up in the attic disturbs some of them.
Well, I had one coming from New York, and the house had CPVC in it.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, I'm repiping the house to copper. I went, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't care. He repiped that whole house in copper because he
He did?
didn't believe anybody.
Oh,
No, I
well.
told him. I said, and I explained why and everything. And he goes, I'm a plumber, and this is what we do. Okay.
Then you do. I know it's like people get beautiful brass fittings, for the outside of their house, and you know what's going to happen to it in 3 years. You're like,
Yeah,
you
like-
put plastic up there. There's a reason.
Yeah, it's like when they do all the nice gold, even in the house, doesn't stay.
No. Okay, the last thing I wanted to bring up was prorations and credits and things like that, and that's on page 9. Then that's standard K. That's your prorations for taxes. That's your prorations for everything that happens, because remember, we have an after effective date and all of that kind of good stuff. So they do, when you go to the title company, it's in this contract. Different contracts have different proration and credits, and every state is different. So you want to make sure you cover that with your buyer. In Florida, using this contract, the prorations are done the day before closing. So if there's any kind of assessments or anything that has to be paid, it's prorated up to, if we're closing tomorrow, it's going to be through the 8th. So the day of closing belongs to the buyer. And that can lead into so many freaking arguments over $10 on property taxes. If you've got an engineer who's doing that kind of stuff, he's like, it's $10. So it's prior to, it goes through in there if you're selling a rental property where there's security deposits or advance rents, they do the same thing. It's prorated the day before closing. So if you have to go back, you extend your closing date, right, another 10 days, they're going to have to go back and re-prorate. If they close on, that being said, if they close on, everybody signs on Friday and the money doesn't come until Monday, just tell everybody to eat the 2 day, just be quiet, leave the closing date as a Friday, because otherwise you have to redo the whole entire packet and you got to redo everything. And there's probably a redraw fee, which is going to be more than the prorations would be. That's really that. I mean, I've skipped all over the contract because these dates go in different time frames as you're doing it. So you want to put yourself in that list so you know which days are supposed to be coming. So it's 3 days for deposits, 5 days, after effective date to do these different kinds of things. Make sure you follow them. And if you leave, and you don't have to put in the 15 days. If it says blank 15 days, don't be stupid and fill it in. I just think that's just dumb. They look at that means they didn't read it in my mind.
Well, some of them say you should never leave it blank.
Yeah, that's good.
But it depends on who taught the class. If
That's
it's
true.
an attorney, then they go, you have to fill it in. Don't
Never
ever
leave
leave
it
it.
blank.
I won't yell at you either way. The only thing that I'm kind of picky about when you mention that is on page 1 when you're writing up the purchase price. They've got all of these little financial things. Anything that has a dollar figure with it, I never want to see that blank, because in my mind somebody can just do whatever the heck they want to do. So that if you're not filling in an amount, put a 0. That would be the main thing. And if you use the as is auto balance, it's really nice because it does all the factoring for you, and that's really, really nice.
You don't have to do any math anymore.
Not real, yeah.
I have an automatic net sheet with the title company I use.
There you go.
It's making us lazy.
And that's okay. But you have to know. Yeah, but it is amazing how we have to know some of those figures, though. What is title insurance per 1,000? What are our doc stamps? What is our intangible tax? Remember all that from when you got your license?
I remember when we had to balance for our broker's license,
We had to do a
the
closing
sheet.
sheet.
The problem was it isn't the way it was ever done, so then you had to figure out how to do it. I took it to my title person and I said, explain this. And she goes, what is it? Because it wasn't the way they prorate and do it.
Well, that lovely new form now, that closing disclosure sheet, that's the only other thing in there that causes
you can't call a HUD.
that does an automatic extension in there too. There's that, but don't worry about that. Oh yeah. That's why they have to read it, federal law, they have to have it 3 days?
Oh, that's right.
3 days
Yeah,
prior
3
to
days prior
closing. So if they're unable to provide it for a specific reason other than just being lazy, then there's an automatic extension in there. There's automatic everything. If there's like a force majeure kind of thing with hurricanes and all that stuff. But those are automatic extension things. I wanted to just really focus on dates that you need to know. But it's written where we can get these deals closed no matter what happens. We can get it closed, but don't F up your job, because then you're going to be because then we forgot to tell the seller we didn't get financing, and now the seller's going to give us our money back, and the buyer wants to buy the house, and the seller is refusing to sell it. Now you've got a mess, and that's because you forgot to do your job right. And then I got to figure out how to get you out of trouble. Most of the time I can do it, but there's sometimes you just say whoops, and how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah. Oh, you're buying a new refrigerator, washer,
Yes.
dryer.
Yes. Yeah, the part that says the following items are excluded from the purchase, that does not say included.
Right. I used to.
We had an agent who wasn't paying attention, and they wrote refrigerator, dishwasher, washer, dryer, microwave, they put it all on the exclusion line.
So the seller sold it, took it.
The seller looked at it and said, The seller didn't say a word. Took all the appliances and put them in the moving truck and left it in the driveway. And then when they went to go do the final walkthrough, the buyer's like, well, where are all the appliances that I was buying? And the seller said, it's not included in the contract. They're in this truck here. Would you like to buy them for $10,000?
Oh my gosh.
You know who paid for those appliances?
You're the agent.
The agent bought the appliances.
I've done that.
I
Just
have-
the
I
washer
bought a
and
refrigerator
dryer.
once.
I had one that I dealt with an agent who'd been around forever. We were friends, and I had the buyer who was a pain. But it was San Carlos Park, and first of all, it said they were leaving all the drapes. Well, the drapes were these old, ugly tapestry things, and so the other agent, when the seller said, "Well, can I take these?" She goes, "Yeah, nobody's gonna want these." Boxed them all up, stuck them in storage. The other thing was that it said that the sprinkler system was on a well. Well, guess what? It wasn't. So by the time it was done, she bought new curtains and had to have a well drilled because of the fact that it was one of the few areas down in San Carlos that it had been hooked up to city water, the whole thing.
And that's why you always, always, always want to have a home inspection.
That's expensive. How much it cost to do the well?
Well, it's
Depends on
been-
what city you're in.
Yeah, she was in the hall.
Yeah, I mean, we've all
You
done
know, and,
stuff.
and the curtains, they didn't even really care about the curtains. It was the idea that she took them and she goes, "They were so ugly." And I said, "Yeah, but you know better than that." She goes, I mean, and she'd been around like 30 years then too. And she goes, "I can't believe I did that." And I said, "I can't believe my people are being such jerks. I'm really sorry. I'll buy you a drink when it's all over." But
There you go. So yeah, so if you feel that you would like another set of eyeballs on any contract before you present it, just let me know. Because it's usually not files and just say, "Go look at it." Bonnie's called me and said, "Can you look at this?" And I will stop and I will look at it. It might take a minute, like if we're in the middle of a dance performance, I'll say, "Wait a minute," I'll get it as soon as we're done and I'll look at it. But that way you can avoid buying $10,000 worth of appliances. So
well, and that was back when you did add that stuff, because now they've added everything. You almost have to cross out stuff that doesn't.
there's
even
no
happen.
microwave, there's no washer, and there is no dryer printed in this thing.
Oh, the microwave is.
The microwave is
I know
not
the
there,
washer
and the
and dryer
washer and
is.
dryer are not there.
Wow.
They've added the TV mount, they've added security things, they've added all kinds of things in there, but there is no microwave, there is no washer dryer in there. And that was a long discussion at Florida Realtors about putting them in, and they decided to leave them out. So if you don't put them in, the seller is under no obligation to leave them.
And pool equipment.
Pool equipment, I believe, is in here now.
Well, the other thing is, if the
I have to look, but I
MLS
think it
says
is.
that they're leaving it, but it isn't in the contract.
This overrides everything.
Right, because a lot of times, I've seen it where they'll put, and per MLS, so they didn't have to write it all out.
Yeah, and you don't want it, that's sloppy,
But,
I mean, they've even added the mailbox.
Does that hold weight as shown in the MLS?
No, not really. Not enough, unless you added the printout of the MLS and you had everybody initial and date and sign it. It's like when you sell things furnished, fully furnished, you want a furnished list, or
Or a list of what doesn't stay, so the rest of it's there.
yeah, and a really good way to go around that. And Marlissa really had a good one with that. Was she had all the photos of the properties. She made everybody initial and date every single page and attached that and made it part of the contract.
Yeah.
And we've had other ones where we've had problems like that. This one woman said, with the exception of some blue birds or something or other that was in the contract, when they went in to do it, well, the blue birds ended up being on paintings, on blankets, on statues. I mean, it was a lot of stuff missing, so you have to be very specific as to what can stay and what can't stay. That's what you always want to do in inventory. If the listing agent doesn't have an inventory, then I would add it in the additional terms and conditions. Seller to provide inventory sheet within 5 days after effective date. Put it, make sure there's a date in there so that there's performance for it.
Yes,
Okay.
because if something could go wrong during that, it does. And
It
gets
does.
very-
So we've covered all kinds of fun stuff. I hope that helps. Our second one is coming up, and what am I doing? Next week, what am I doing? I'm doing something. We're gonna tear the contract apart over the next 4 weeks and just really. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah, we've covered some of it here, but we'll just dive deep every week. So bring your questions, bring your stories, bring your things that you
Well, I
want
think
to
it's
know
good
about.
now because since things have kind of
And have a
slowed down,
fantastic day. As JJ always says,
we get
peace out.
complacent.